Okay, looks like we have a quorum. So let me start off. Mr. Whiteside, did you have a question you wanted to raise?
Oh, I just wanted to add a question, Professor.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I had some questions about our upcoming midterm. Because we're all pretty nervous, and that you wrote the textbook, and you seem to know a lot about the subject, and we just want to make sure that we can, prove to you that we know a lot about it too. So we're going to be covering weeks 1 through 5, correct?
Yeah, the readings assigned under the headings 1 through 5, that's what you're responsible for on the midterm. The readings that appear under week 6 are geared for discussion following the midterm.
So that means that the test will be timed then?
Yeah, the test, I plan to time the test. I generally give 2 hours.
And do we know how many questions we should probably expect?
Yeah, roughly around 180, I think.
180?
Yeah.
Multiple choice?
They're multiple choice, true, false, no essays. Ms. Herrera? It's conceivable there could be simple, no, it's not 3 per minute, I don't think. That's if you only.
For 2 hours?
2 hours, yeah. So that's.
I'm sorry, that's
yeah.
a little over 1.
Yeah.
45 seconds.
There's some simple, very simple calculations. Now, if this panics you, the time, it's okay with me, we can make it longer.
Okay, that's good.
All right, so let's run it, you can quit at 9. Okay, and then we can just call it a night at 9 if that's what you prefer. Okay, all right?
Less pressure.
Okay, I would expect that there'll be people leaving probably around 7:30, some people. Okay, so it doesn't look like we'll have much discussion or any after the exam, but then take the assignment that is under week 6. That's what you should come in prepared for on week 8.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Yeah, the readings under weeks 1 through 5, they're what you're responsible for in the midterm. Okay. Yes, Mr. Davis.
Again, to reiterate, the best way to prepare for that test might be to look at the short questions.
Well, the best way is to have diligently done the readings through the term.
But if you don't want to read anything and waste a lot of time.
I'm sure you speak from the perspective of many, but then you're at risk. So, I mean, I did try to stress at the very beginning, not to leave it for the last weekend, and I'm sure many have. But
to contradict what he said is that there are no multiple choice questions that we can study from the Hazlitt, so we have to read the Hazlitt.
Okay, at least you'll have done that. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Weatherford.
Well, to build off of that, if you look at the review materials, those multiple choice questions are in some cases, one question is a half a page long.
Well, there might be some significant length of a few questions, yeah.
I mean, you cannot complete a question like that and read it word for word in
Okay.
45 seconds.
Okay, well then you've got extra time. It's going to run till 9 o'clock. Bring fold-away cots and we'll run it to the next one. Anything else?
I have a question now
Sure.
about the midterm.
Good, yeah.
Just before we left, and I know this has been a recurring theme, that it's said that we have, people have limitless needs and wants for wealth. And I was considering that, thinking maybe it would be more accurate to say that people have limitless needs and wants for happiness, to try to be happy.
Yeah.
And it's not the accumulation of wealth, perceived notion of how to be happy. Anyway,
Yeah.
thought. In which case, it wouldn't necessarily mean that because it wouldn't necessarily be a drive to produce. You might be happy at your current situation. Some people are. Some people do accept welfare or do accept homelessness or whatever.
Yeah.
They don't mind being indigent, for example. In which case, there's absolutely zero productivity in the sense of economics.
You say there are people who don't mind being indigent. They don't mind not working, but why is it that they're asking for handouts?
Well,
They want more than they've got, and I don't think any of them would turn down a bigger handout or more handouts. So I think what is true is that there are many people, or a significant number at any rate, who, while they might want more wealth, they're not really willing to do very much to go out and obtain it. Now, I would agree that the happiness is more fundamental than wealth. We don't want wealth as an end in itself. We always want wealth as the means of accomplishing further things. But virtually anything you would want to do, any physical action on impacting the world, any enjoyable experience, virtually everything depends on the employment of wealth. Okay.
I just
Yeah.
mean by that happiness might be actually be a limiting factor in that, because people might say at a certain point, like you said, I have enough wealth, even though I could produce more, I'm not going to.
Well, people, you see, people also value leisure. And in their leisure, they value the application of wealth. But I would think, even though people value leisure, if you ask, in the time you are willing to work, would you rather earn more or less? They would rather earn more. And to some degree, they might want to earn more to have more leisure. Yes, Mr. Taylor?
Yes, would you accept a complaint as a result, or a complaint?
I'm sorry?
Would you accept a complaint about the effects of your text?
The effects.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was sharing with my wife the section where you talk about that, animals are different than humans, and humans require wealth, the unlimited amount of wealth,
Yeah.
because they're stimulated intellectually, by new things, having new gadgets and new things.
Yeah.
And the problem is that how that impacts your budget at home.
Yeah.
When your wife then says, "Oh, that's great. That explains why you should let me go and buy new shoes." On a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So that's a little.
Well, you're giving an illustration of the limitless need and desire for wealth.
But joking aside, I got excited about that for a moment.
Yeah.
All kidding aside, I got excited about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I'm a proponent of growth and trying to build more.
Yeah.
But then when you're counseling around and you're struggling with the idea of building up ultimate wealth in a society, in our country, the question is, how do you deal with the balance of this type of mantra, which says, build it so that you can buy more things, with the issue around, if someone just takes that literally and goes and spends, then true wealth ultimately really is not accomplished.
Well, you see, a limitless need and desire for wealth doesn't mean that we want to get everything we can in the present moment. Anyone who's saving, if he saved less or didn't save at all, he could buy more in the present moment, but then what would be happening to him in the future? You see, the desire for wealth has a time horizon involved, and the more rational we are, the more long range we are, and so what we would really want is more wealth viewed over the course of our lifetimes. We'd really like to have a higher level of wealth throughout our lives, and hopefully more as the years pass. See, it's always nice to be able to look forward to things being better in the future than they are in the present. You can tolerate the present more easily that way. If we have someone who wiped himself out on a big fling in the present, that wouldn't be a course of action conducive to wealth or to happiness. Yeah. Okay, well, let me turn to related matters here. I'm going to go ahead and develop this point E briefly, rounding out the picture, Say's law and competition, and then I'm going to return back to D, because there's a lot more to say in connection with it. Yes, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can activate it. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. I have to reduce it. No. Now, the example I gave you with the potato growers, I postulated that there was this dramatic improvement in their productive ability, and yet everybody in that industry ended up losing by it, at least temporarily. The potato growers were suffering a major reduction in income as an industry. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of you were thinking, well, how can we reconcile this with the fact that the source of introducing the improvements that increase our ability to produce is the profit motive. People are introducing more efficient methods in order to increase their wealth and income, not, as the potato growers, to suffer a loss. So it's necessary to reconcile that and to show how those who are introducing the process of progress are able to profit from it, even though the conditions of the industry as a whole are essentially those in our potato growers example. All we have to do is modify the assumption of the whole industry all at once, overnight, doubling its production. The way improvements, it's possible that something like that could occur, and then the analysis I gave would be fully applicable. But I think in most cases, when you have an industry like potato growing, where the demand is inelastic, those who introduce the innovations are still in a position to profit. The losses borne by the industry as a whole are suffered by that part of the industry which has not introduced the innovation. And we can bring that out by elaborating our example or modifying it somewhat. And the point is to show how those who introduce improvements usually benefit from them, even if the industry as a whole loses. And here we are. I have a spreadsheet. I'll need to reduce this. Okay. We need to break the industry up into segments. Let this represent the potato industry. And here we are. The total industry is initially producing an output of 1. And there are two elements in the industry. There's one I've labeled the progressive part. This is the part that's going to introduce the innovation. It initially accounts for 10% of the industry. Then there's the rest of the industry, which initially doesn't introduce the innovation. And the doubling of production is initially confined just to this 1/10 of the industry, this progressive part that now increases its output to an amount equal to 2/10 of the industry's initial output. So the industry's total output is now going to be 1.1. 1/10 has doubled, that adds a 10th. The total is 1.1. Now, if the demand is inelastic, which it is, all that requires is that the price fall in greater degree than the quantity produced increases. So we have the quantity produced in total being 11/10, 1.1 to 1, and the price has to fall in greater proportion than 10 to 11. So let's assume the price is 0.8. We have a 10% increase in the supply, a 20% reduction in the price. That's an inelastic demand. Okay, what will be the effect on the revenue of the whole industry that's producing 1.1 times as much, but selling it at 8/10 the price? What's happened to revenues in the industry as a whole? It's less, it's 0.88, right? But what's happened to the revenue of this particular segment, this initial 1/10, they're now producing the equivalent of 2/10. They sell 0.2, they sell an output of 0.2 at the price of 0.8. What has happened to their revenues compared to what they were initially?
60%.
They're up now, it's 0.16, it used to be 0.1. They have a substantial increase in their revenues, so it can be profitable for them. Notice they're in a position to do better even while the industry as a whole does worse. They're up 0.6, the industry as a whole is down 0.12, and the other 9/10 of the industry, they're down much more. They're down 0.18. That part of the industry used to take in 0.9. That was their revenue. They took in 0.9 of the revenue. and now they're producing 0.9 still, but they're producing 0.9 at a price of 0.8, so they've gone from 0.9 to 0.72. Their revenue has dropped 0.18. They absorb the loss of the whole industry and provide the profit of the progressive 10%. So the innovators who are introducing the improvement, they're still gaining. It's the industry as a whole that's losing, but the losses are borne by the part of the industry that has not adopted the innovation. They have a loss equal to the loss of the industry as a whole, plus the profit of this innovating portion. Now, when we look at the improvement, at the doubling of output per unit in potato growing, and we give it some time to work out, well, where are the people leaving potato growing going to come from? From what part of the industry will they come from? Not from the 10% that's improving. The group that leaves will be coming from the 90% of the industry that hasn't innovated. Now, anyone who's remaining in the industry, what will they be attempting to do? To innovate. So they'll be adopting the innovation, and then it may be that one segment of the industry is leaving, a part that's remaining is improving, they're becoming more productive, and it might be, if we looked at this thing in stages, well, now we have a second 1/10 that doubles its production, and the total supply is now maybe 1.15 or 1.18. The price drops further. The gains of the innovators are still there, but they're diminishing. And it could conceivably work out that everybody who adopts the innovation either is better off than he was at the beginning for a time, and the last adopter ends up being just as well off as he was in the beginning, not better off. And the whole burden of loss is on those who have not adopted the innovation. So that from the perspective of the individual firms, the adoption of the innovation is always the more profitable thing to do.
I'm sorry, would you repeat your last paragraph when you said the impact of the last adopter?
Yeah, the last adopter, he is moving from a loss-making position, and now he's getting back to where he was before the whole process started. Remember, we pointed out that the end result would be that those who remained in potato growing would be as well off as they were at the beginning,
right?
Because the price would recover. Well, the last adopter of the innovation would be moving from a position of temporary loss, getting back to where he was before the process improved. So it could work out, doesn't absolutely have to, but I think this would be the case more often than not, that there is always financial improvement in the adoption of the improvement. There's always financial gain in the adoption of the improvements. Not like in our original discussion, the entire industry loses because they all adopted it once. I think that while that could happen, the more likely pattern is that limited parts of the industry progressively adopt the improvement, and each one who does is actually earning greater profit than he did before, or at least going from a loss to getting back to where he was at the beginning. Yes, Mr. Barton.
Is this graph that you just put up here, is this something that we need to be able to, say, explain on the exam, and if so?
I wouldn't ask you an essay question like this.
No, but I mean,
No.
maybe to, well, do we need to know, do we need to know for the exam? My point is, since it's not in the book, I haven't been able to find it, could you
haven't?
that be emailed to us on the portal so that we could have a copy of that and be able to look at it?
Let me see if it's not in the book. I'd be surprised if it isn't. I think it is in the book. Let me enlarge this.
The example is, it's on page 569.
569. Let's see. Yeah, it's in the book. Let's see, where does it start? It must start on the page before.
It starts right at the top of that column.
It starts right at the top.
Let's say so there.
Yeah, the exact same example I've given you is in the book.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The question comes to mind that the person or the company who's the last to innovate,
Yeah.
and they've been losing money all along, and now they now come back to just where they were. They're
Yeah.
never going to recover that money they've lost. I mean, it's
No,
like-
they would be poorer than they were at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the implication. Yeah. But whoever is going to remain has to adopt the innovation. I suppose you're in business and you're meeting foreign competition or whatever, and your competitors are selling at lower costs at lower prices than correspond to your costs. Well, what must you do if you're going to remain in that business?
You better catch up.
You must catch up. Either do that or get out. So if you're going to stay, you've got to catch up. And when you do catch up, you'll be better off than you are attempting to remain in the industry without catching up. And it might be that for quite a while, the innovators, the early adopters, and for some time after, they're more profitable than they were at the beginning, though in diminishing degree, and ultimately, there's no special profit at all attaching to the innovation.
But that kind of leads to the rich get richer kind of theory, and that they've now had some additional profits, which then allow them to do further innovations, which may make it
Well, that
better.
might happen, but it's not like here, in the example we gave, you have this innovative 10% of the industry. They're starting off relatively small. They're the ones who are getting richer. See, the ones who are getting richer are I would say, pardon me?
They're the ones who choose to make the change.
Yeah, the adopters,
Yeah.
if you talk about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, I think we have some dramatic counterexamples. The company that used to be far and away the richest company in the economic system was AT&T. And from the looks of things, they're on their way out of existence. In 1980, I don't think anybody heard of Microsoft. And they're now either the wealthiest firm, or their stock is valued the highest in the world. So this is quite a reversal. If you look at a list of the firms in the Fortune 500, you'll find there are many, many firms that weren't there 10 or 20 years ago, and there are many that were there 10 or 20 years ago that have long since gone out of existence.
But the companies that continue to prosper are companies that continue to innovate.
Yeah.
Continue to push the limit and continue
Right.
to try to expand.
And that's what they have to do. You see, an excellent model of continual innovation, at least until very recently, has been Intel. And I think this is a pattern of profit-making across the board. You can make an exceptional profit on the foundation of introducing a newer, better product or a more efficient method of producing an existing product. Those are the two leading ways.
But the rich get richer until they decide not to continue to innovate, until they rest on their laurels.
Well, they may rest on their laurels, and they don't have the ability to innovate, or there are others who are out-innovating them. And if you notice, the same point about the Fortune 500, I think applies to the great fortunes. At one time, one of the wealthiest people was John Jacob Astor and Commodore Vanderbilt. How prominent are their descendants? Not very. They're far surpassed by Gates and Dell and Paul Allen, people who don't come from rich parents, and even the heirs of Rockefeller. At one time, they were the main fortune in the country, but I think collectively, all of the descendants of Rockefeller combined are worth less than $1 billion. And here's Gates, who's at last report is $48 billion. And then there's Warren Buffett, reported at $41 billion. He didn't come from particularly wealthy parents, I don't believe. So there's a lot more churning going on, and it really is fallacious to assume that the rich are getting richer. You see, what's true is if you have continual ability, if you have significant ability and you continue to apply it, the wealth you gain from the earlier applications of your ability can be the foundation of then applying your ability later on a bigger scale. So there's Michael Dell. When he was in college at the University of Texas, he was supposedly selling computers out of his dorm room and making some money that way. And you can be sure he saved and reinvested the bulk of that money, and then he was able to apply further innovations with a bigger capital, made more money, and kept innovating, and can do it on a bigger and bigger scale. But if he loses that ability to innovate, if others surpass him, then his profits will shrink. He can consume more than he's making. His heirs will probably not be able to continue his performance. So, pardon me?
That's good, I like that.
Okay, well, you see, there's a basic optimism connected with sound economics. And to say a related word on this subject, people very often talk about the equality of opportunity. They want the equality of opportunity. I don't know, did we have a discussion of this? The equality of opportunity. And I begin by asking, well, at some point they need a new CEO of General Motors. And I was not given any opportunity to get that job. I had no equality of opportunity. Well, who has such an opportunity?
The COO.
Well, maybe some other high officer of General Motors, or high officer of Ford, or some other major company. There's a limited number of people who've climbed within the range of possibly being considered. And the immense majority of people have no chance at that at all. So in order to have opportunities, you have to bring something to the table. Your opportunities are commensurate with what you bring to the table. And people are in a position over the course of their lifetimes progressively to improve what they bring to the table and to widen their opportunities. So it could be someone at the age of 18 gets a low-level job at General Motors. And he does that exceptionally well. He's noticed, he gets a promotion. He does that well, and now that he's in this higher position, still higher positions come within reach. Opportunity should be thought of as climbing the rungs of a ladder. What you've done up to the present moment, that determines how far you've advanced, what opportunities will be open to you. And the key thing with opportunity is not that they should be equal, they can't be equal really, but that people should have the freedom to exploit the best of the opportunities open to them at the time. If they can do that, then they'll have better opportunities later on. The idea of equality of opportunity, most people think, well, if you come from poor parents, you don't have an equal opportunity. It's just wealth. But if you think about it further, doesn't it make a difference to a child whether his parents love him or hate him? Or what kind of education his parents have? All sorts of things. Now, what would you have to do to really achieve equality of opportunity in the sense of everyone having the same upbringing, having the same genetic inheritance? You see, does a child who's born with the genes to become intelligent and beautiful, are they do they begin life with the same opportunities as someone who's born with a low IQ and is going to be ugly?
No.
All right, what would you have to do to give them the equality of opportunity?
Extreme makeover.
Okay, extreme makeover. Okay.
You have to lower levels.
Or eugenics. If you could determine at birth, if we had genetic engineering carried sufficiently to a high enough level, then everyone could have the same gene pool, be brought up in the same arrangement, platonic orphanages. Every child would be treated exactly the same. That would be the requirement for really strict equality of opportunity. But is that something we want? I mean, that's ridiculous. The key thing is that people be free to do the best they can with the opportunities that confront them and to improve their abilities, and then they'll widen the opportunities open to them. So if you're interested in further discussion along these lines, I have a discussion in, Chapter 9, Part B somewhere, which is not on the reading list, but you might find it of interest. And one of the things that goes into is how a child of poor, ignorant parents could conceivably surpass the child of very wealthy, successful parents. It depends on what they've done with their lives. They've had two infants in the crib. One of them is not in a position to call up his father's stockbroker and tell him what profitable investments to make. And then you can see by the time they're 6 or 7, maybe one child is eager to acquire knowledge. He's curious. He has questions. He's eager to find answers. The other one doesn't particularly care. Well, they're developing their means of acquiring further knowledge. Now, maybe by the time they're 14, one of them has studied science. He's learned some elementary physics, mathematics, trigonometry. The other one is just winging it, barely getting by. By the time they're 20 or 21, the serious one has made himself into something productive and valuable. Maybe he's become an engineer. He'll be an asset to an employer. The other one is dead weight. Maybe he'll get more money, but only because his father is secretly paying his salary. And then by the time they're 30, the one who's developed properly, he may well be in the position of introducing some significant innovations, earn money at a higher rate than the dead wood klutz. And once that happens, if he's earning a very high rate of profit and saving and reinvesting it through the years, and the other one is just getting by on the strength of his father's connections, well, the one who starts as the poorer child, by the time he's 40, he will probably be the richer man. And this sort of thing happens again and again. And there's a term for this which has practically disappeared from the language, unfortunately. It used to be present. And that's the concept of the self-made man. The way people view things today is they think everyone is the product of his genes and environment. It's just automatically generated by the genes and environment. But actually, we make ourselves by the choices we make as we go. And that, I think, is the right way to look at it, in a very optimistic way, and it goes with a free country and a capitalist civilization. Yes, Mr. Richards.
This truly is an American ideal.
Yeah, this was the ideal of the United States for much of our history, and it's sort of been lost along the way.
It's kind of being diluted by socialism kind of creeping in here.
Yeah, the same philosophy that promotes socialism destroys this. It's the idea the individual can't accomplish anything. Everything is thrust upon him by outside forces over which he has no control.
Which is interesting, because even at Pepperdine, we're thrust into teams all the time. It's teams this, teams that. So what's going on here is actually different from what you're advocating.
No teams in this class.
No, I mean,
Well, I think it's a very astute identification on your part. So I congratulate you. I think what Mr. Richards is pointing to is a kind of implied collectivist element in this stress on teams.
Teams at Pepperdine.
Oh.
As opposed to individualistic ideals.
Where here we are in this class where it's all based on your individual performance on two exams.
Exactly.
Now, I expect probably when the evaluations are turned in, there are going to be people saying, some people complaining very strongly about this. I'm undercutting the philosophy of the school, perhaps Christianity too. So,
Do you get a lot of pressure from other faculty members?
I get pressure. I'm not a popular faculty member here.
This doesn't count?
Right now.
No, that doesn't count very much, surprisingly. The book.
Why are you not popular here?
Because I think my ideas are generally unpopular. Now, perhaps less so in this class. I'm not sure. I'll know at the end of the term. And not even Orange County. Sometimes I get evaluations that put me at the bottom of the whole faculty.
For the department? Or
No, even the whole faculty, beyond the department. Yeah, Mr. Corman.
I find that interesting. You say you would not be popular because of your ideas, because I've been reading your book.
Yeah.
It seems like back in the 80s, we called productionism Reaganomics.
Well, there's an overlap. There is some affinity for it, yeah. But the ideas are very unpopular.
Why would that be? I mean, if the policies of the Reagan administration were the resulting in the economic boom that we had in the 80s,
Yeah.
why would that be unpopular?
Well, many people would not accept that was that connection held. So, you see, it's really never the case that what is true out there in reality automatically writes itself on people's brains. what people believe is governed by their ideas. The way they respond to things, it's governed by their ideas. Socialism was never, in fact, a productive system. It was never really workable, but until the bitter end, millions and tens of millions of people supported it. And perhaps the majority of the world's population, even the United States population, is very strongly opposed to many of the major features of capitalism, even though it's those features that are responsible for their prosperity. So people can hold wrong ideas. Ideas never automatically correspond to the facts. You have to work to make your ideas correspond to the facts.
So do you believe that the economic progress in the 80s was a result of productionism?
Yeah, I would say it was the result of a considerable reduction in government interference. Price controls were abolished. The last price controls were abolished. Income tax rates were sharply reduced. These are probably the most important things that were done. Okay. Let me turn back now to Say's law and this question of economic adjustment and the fact that it's possible to have partial relative overproduction. That's overproduction in parts of the economy, overproduction relative to the rest of the system, but never a problem of general, economy-wide, absolute overproduction. And let's see why not. Now, this table, 13.2, Say's law and the process of economic adjustment, this, in effect, highlights, brings out the major points in our discussion of what happened in the potato industry. We started out, we have the potato growers, we have an initial equilibrium. The price of potatoes is initially 1. And here's potatoes, they're a small part of the economy. We'll assume 1%, so we don't have to get into too small a fraction. We assume that in the entire economy, revenue and income of the economy as a whole is 500 units of money. Each unit could stand for $10 billion. It's not to be taken as $500. Each unit represents an awful lot of spending. We're trying to capture the economy-wide aggregate spending in a relatively small number, 500. And here's the potato growing industry. It's initially producing an output of 1, its initial output, and it sells for 5. All the rest of the economy combined has an output worth $4.95. So that's our initial condition. And we're putting specific numbers. It's very important in thinking about economic matters, if you want to grasp them intellectually, to always try to use specific numerical examples like this. All right, we then have a doubling of the supply of potatoes. And what happens to the price? Okay, it's 1/3. Now, the potato growers are producing twice the quantity at 1/3 the price. That means their revenues are 2/3 of what they used to be. Well, what's 2/3 of 5? Okay, 3.33. And what happens to revenue and income in the rest of the economy where people spend the money they no longer spend in buying potatoes? I mean, that goes up equivalently. So notice it's down 1.67 over here from 5 to 3.33. It's up 1.67 over here. The total in the whole economy is still 500. Now, this is state of affairs 2. And then as potato growers leave and fan out into other industries, we come back to a new equilibrium in condition 3. Here, the quantity of potatoes is cut back from double to 3/2, and the price of potatoes rises from 1/3 to 1/2. Now, at this point, the potato growers are selling 3/2 the output at 1/2 the price. So what's the total revenue and income of the potato industry? What's 3/2 times 1/2? 6/4. That's, I know, 3/2 times 1/2. 3/2 times 1/2 Three-fourths. It's 3 times 1 over 2 times 2, that's 3/4. So it's 3/4 of what it was before. It was originally 5, now it's 375. It's come up a little bit from 3.33 to 3.75, and revenue and income in the rest of the economy has declined equivalently from 496.67 to 496.25, the same amount. Now, in this final state of affairs, in this new equilibrium, we've seen that potato production is cut back from double to 1.5, and the production of other things has been expanded somewhat on the strength of the 25% of the original potato growers who are now fanned out through the rest of the economy. All right, this is the new equilibrium. We've seen that every group is better off here than they were at the beginning. The non-potato growers, they're getting 50% more potatoes for 3/4 the expenditure. They get more of other goods. Those who remain in potato growing have a higher standard of living. Those who have fanned out into the rest of the economy, they have a higher standard of living. Everyone is better off. Now, let us take this final equilibrium, condition 3, and let this be the ground on which we stand. This will be our standing point from the perspective of which we look back on condition 2. We're standing here and looking back to here. Well, if we look back to here, how could we describe the situation of potato production here compared to here? Pardon me?
Worse.
Well, it was worse. The potato growers were worse off. Here we are. This situation represented an excessive production of potatoes. Doubling the production of potatoes is too much. If we stopped here, the improvement in productivity made possible in potato growing would not be very well used. So you just think about this fact. All industries use common factors of production to a very important degree. Every industry, without exception, requires labor. Every industry requires labor. And labor is capable of being used in many different employments. Not everyone can work in every job, but practically everyone is capable of working in a significant variety of jobs. Many materials have a wide variety of uses, like steel or iron. Iron is used directly or indirectly in a wide variety of industries. Petrochemicals, and so on. There's a name for this. Many factors of production are non-specific factors of production, meaning they're not tied to any one isolated employment. They have a more or less wide potential. There are some things that might be absolutely specific, like if you have a machine which is good for absolutely nothing but putting wrappers on tobacco and churning out cigarettes, and it can't be modified to do anything else, if that's all it's good for, well, that would be a specific factor of production. But the great majority of things are non-specific to a high degree, above all, labor. And this means that when the production of any one good becomes more efficient, we have a range of choices. We don't have to simply increase the output of the particular good in which the improvement in efficiency occurs. Like here we are in our example, the potato growers become twice as efficient. Does that mean that we must produce twice the quantity of potatoes? No, we have a choice. In fact, our choice ranges from twice the quantity of potatoes and nothing more of anything else, to no more potatoes and using half the labor previously required in potato growing to expand the production of other things. Right. Okay, now, what determines what use is going to be made of this improvement in productivity? Because it's not dictated by the improvement itself.
You're the president of the firm.
Well, the president of the firm wants to be profitable. Mr. Wilson is saying demand. Okay, could you elaborate on demand? That you're in the right direction.
Well, the amount that you're going to be producing is going to be based on the amount that the people, your consumers, are going to be able to pick up on.
Okay, it'll depend on what the consumers want. Now, if here we are, in order to get the consumers to buy twice the output of potatoes, we have a ruinous fall in price. What does that indicate about the intensity of the consumer's desire for additional potatoes? It's reduced. They don't want the additional potatoes very much. The additional potatoes, if we think in terms of marginal utility, the marginal utility of the doubled supply of potatoes is low. Now, what are people indicating at the same time that they don't want all those extra potatoes? What are they indicating that they do want?
Other goods.
Other goods. Notice what's happened to the demand for things other than potatoes. That's gone up. That indicates that people would like to buy more of other things, and these industries are now somewhat more profitable. So what's happened is, here we are, we have this improvement in the ability to produce potatoes, but that doesn't mean that's where we have to use it. And if we do use it just to produce double the potatoes, we're largely wasting the benefit of the improvement. Why produce double the potatoes that people don't particularly want? So the same improvement yields greater benefit if we produce less than double, and instead withdraw labor that doesn't have to produce just potatoes, withdraw labor to expand the production of things other than potatoes. Those other things are more highly valued than the additional potatoes. You see, what it comes down to here is there's a choice that people are making. Do they want a fourth half of potatoes? Do they want a fourth half of potatoes and no more of other goods? Or would they rather have just 3 halves more potatoes instead of 4, and have more of other goods instead of a fourth half of potatoes? Which are they indicating that they prefer? The more of other goods, they prefer that to the fourth half of potatoes. And they can have that, right? Because the same labor that grows these potatoes can be shifted out and produce more of other things. So that represents a better use of the improvement than if it had to be confined in potato growing. Mr. Wright, you wanted to make an observation?
Unless there's a potato union, in which case they'd be making the same amount, and the government will be buying them up and shipping them off somewhere else.
So they sell their French fries.
Okay, yeah, now, the process can be interfered with, but notice the implications of doing that. Suppose the potato growers form a voting bloc, and they can determine some swing states or whatever, and then they offer to trade their votes to back other people's projects. And so maybe they get legislation that the government will now buy the fourth half of potatoes and provide better incomes to the potato growers. Well, if that happens, and the government is accumulating the reserves or giving them away around the world or on food stamps or whatever, what is that doing to the well-being of the general consuming public?
Not that much less that they get.
They're getting, something is being produced that people value less, or maybe not at all, at the expense of the expanded production of other things that they value a lot more highly. So that would be the result. Now, what I want to bring out is, looking back from the perspective of condition 3 to condition 2, we could say that when there is a doubling of potatoes, that's too much of an increase. That's an overproduction of potatoes. We don't want a doubling. We might want some more, but not double. But what is also true over here, when there is only a doubling of potatoes and no increase in other things? If we have an overproduction of potatoes, by the same token, what is present with respect to the production of things other than potatoes? Well, an underproduction. You see, here we're producing no more of other things. What we want is some expansion of other things and a lesser expansion of potatoes. When we have only an expansion of potatoes and no expansion of other things, in that context we have a relative overproduction of potatoes accompanied by an equivalent underproduction of things other than potatoes. You see, we do want the improvement in production, we do want more goods, but we don't want it all in the form of potatoes. There are other things that we want ahead of much of the increase in potatoes. And sometimes, like in table salt, we won't want any more of that item, but we would want more of other things. And so long as the improvement is used in a way that doesn't conform to the valuations of the consumers as manifested in the market in the way they spend their money, as long as production doesn't conform to that, then we have some sectors of the economy that are overproducing, but others that are equivalently underproducing. Now, you see, do we want and need the improvement in potato production? We do want the improvement, but we want the best form of it is not to just produce more potatoes. We want to use that improved ability to produce in a different way, to have a lesser increase in potatoes and an increase in other things. And until that's achieved, if we have only the more production of potatoes, potatoes are in overproduction, other things are in underproduction. Yes, Mr. Boyd?
Doesn't the desire for the improvement come from those potato growers and not necessarily from the rest of the economy? And all that to say that if there's no desire out there to improve the production, we're going to stay level. There will be no up or down. So it has to be the desire. Maybe just a few of those potato growers say, you know, we can grow this thing twice as fast if we use a hot box instead of a soil or something.
Okay, yeah.
But if that's not available, and if the people out there that are doing it, that are growing these potatoes, don't look for that, we, the general public, are not going to know that. And we can't impress upon them, give me more potatoes so that I can take and have more things and apply my wealth to other areas so that I can improve my lifestyle.
You know, I think what you're saying is the innovations are coming from the side of the producers.
Yes.
In this case, if no one figured out an improved method of potato production, we wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
The fact that the consumers would like to buy their potatoes at lower prices, they'd like more of them at lower prices, that by itself would never be sufficient to bring us any additional potatoes. So you have to have the actual methods, the better products and better methods have to be developed by people who are going to apply them. Now, they may be within the industry, or they may not be within the industry at present. You have total outsiders who enter an industry with a new, better idea, and they are the ones who shake it up and improve it, or it can happen from within the industry. That's true. So they're responsible for making the improvement an actuality. And then people do want the benefit of the improvements. And then there's the question, well, how should we apply the improvement? You see, when we have an improvement in any one line, we could use it exclusively in that one line. Or we could use it to a lesser degree in that particular line and free up labor to produce more of other things. And that will be determined in a free market by the pattern of consumer demand. Yes, Ms. Yang?
Touching up on this again. Basically, what you're saying is to diversify the portfolio. What we're doing right now, like Procter & Gamble, they own a lot of separate affiliated companies. Will it be the same thing as what you're saying right now, like basically shift the labor to other industries?
Well, you see, you're looking at it from the perspective of what might go on within a given company like Procter & Gamble.
Right.
And to the extent they're able to, they'd want to expand branches that they think will be more profitable, contract branches that they think will be less profitable. But we're looking at a perspective far wider than any one company. And Procter & Gamble doesn't produce everything. They're in a very limited number of items, right? So when you have an improvement in any one line, it's possible that you could simply produce more of that item, or you could produce a lesser increase of that item and produce other things as in greater quantity, or maybe nothing more of that item and just produce more of other things. And then there are cases, opposite kinds of cases, where if the production of a given good becomes less expensive, this may open up a wider market and require that we have more people employed in it. Now, let me give you a counter type of example to the potato growers. Take the automobile industry in the first few decades of the 20th century. Back around 1900 or so, a new automobile was comparable in cost to a luxury yacht today.
Wow.
Around 1900 or a few years later, a new automobile sold for about $10,000, and that was one of these rickety contraptions that you'd have to start with a hand crank. And at the same time, the average annual income of a wage earner was about $600. So just think, $600 a year is what someone is earning. Here's something that costs $10,000. That's almost 17 years' income. When that was true, only a bare handful of people could afford a new automobile. So how big do you think the automobile industry could be in that environment? That would be a small boutique-type industry catering to very wealthy buyers, a handful of very wealthy buyers. Now, by the mid-1920s, Ford had succeeded in producing a very greatly improved automobile that could be sold profitably at a price of $300. Now, to bring the cost down to this extent, you had to have incredible labor-saving improvements. But what do you think the effect was on when you have $300 automobiles? How many do you think the industry ends up selling? Well, millions instead of a couple of hundred. And then how many people do you think end up being employed in the automobile industry?
Many thousands.
It becomes the biggest industry in the country. And so in a case of this kind, where you have labor-saving improvements, better quality product, the effect can be to radically enlarge the industry compared to the rest of the economy. And so here we have more production. The item is getting less expensive, but it's not enough additional production. We want still more. So with an improvement in production in the auto industry, for quite a while, it was still underproducing. People wanted still more. You see, it depends on what are the valuations of the consumers. When a given item can be produced more efficiently, it can mean people want no more of that item, just more of other items, or they want a lot more of that item, so much more that we have to expand it beyond the improvement. So these different outcomes are possible, and the way they're communicated, what is best, is dictated by the way the consumers are spending their own money. They're spending to buy the things that they consider more important rather than less important. And that's what will bring about the change. Now, you have to keep in mind a couple of major things here. It's always beneficial to improve the ability to produce. It's always beneficial to be able to produce more. But we may not get the greatest benefit from a given improvement because it might be applied excessively in certain lines and insufficiently in other lines. That can happen. That's the case with the potato growers. And so long as that is true, we have a relative overproduction in some lines accompanied by an equivalent underproduction in other lines. So here we are, overall, in the aggregate, we're producing more. Is that a problem? Does that represent overproduction, that we're able to produce more? Or is the problem that the increase might be badly apportioned and we're concentrating too heavily on certain things? It's the second. So you can have a problem of relative partial overproduction in some areas, accompanied by equivalent underproduction, but we never have a problem of a general, economy-wide, absolute overproduction. That is a very major point to keep in mind. We want more production, but there might be in some cases a problem that the benefit of the increase is being lost because it's unduly concentrated in some limited lines, and we want more production elsewhere. Let me give you a couple of further examples along these lines. Would we like to have a doubled real income? Would you individually like to have a doubled? Okay, I think so. That's the reason why you're here in the program, I assume. Okay, now, what is the only real way that we can obtain doubled real incomes? Would we have doubled real incomes if the government just cranked out more paper dollars and everyone earned twice the money? No, then we'd have twice the prices. We'd earn twice as much, but we'd be paying twice the prices. We wouldn't have any real gain. What have we shown we need to have if when we're earning twice the money, we're going to actually have twice the buying power?
Passport.
Pardon me?
Passport to leave the country when the dollar's worth more.
Efficiencies for more production.
We have to have more goods for the money to buy. Now, so the foundation of higher real income, real income is more production. But notice, production does not increase at a uniform rate across all the different industries. in any given year, you might have no improvements at all in many or most industries. You might have some dramatic improvements in a handful of industries. But it's the improvements in the ability to produce that are generating the additional real income. Every time in any industry it becomes possible to produce something more efficiently or produce it better, that is the source of a rise in real income. It's not the increase in the quantity of money. It's not the increase in our money earnings. Our money earnings can be increasing at the same time, but they're two distinct processes. The critical thing is the increase in the ability to produce. But this increase, as I say, occurs unevenly. And there can be times when it's heavily concentrated in some lines rather than others. Now, what would be the effect to bring out, I'll give you a couple of examples. Suppose by some miracle we could produce twice as much of each and everything with the same labor. We could produce the same labor applied everywhere across the board and became twice as productive, not just in potato growing, but in each and everything. So that would mean that with the same total labor, we could produce double the total supply of goods. That would constitute a doubled real income. That would be the foundation of a doubled real income. But do you think if we had a doubled real income, we would then want to buy twice the quantity of each thing that we now buy? No, we would not. There's some things like food, potatoes, whatever, we would want little or no more of. But there are other things that we presently consider luxuries that we can't afford to the extent we'd like to, we would want more than double of them. Well, if we start out with each industry producing double, there are going to be many industries that are overproducing, but there'll be others that are equivalently underproducing. What we would need is a major redeployment of labor and capital across the economy, taking labor and capital away from the industries we presently consider necessities that we're already very well supplied with, and using it to expand the luxury industries. And until we had that expansion, if we started out merely every industry is producing double, well, we'd have an overproduction of many things, but accompanied by an equivalent underproduction of just as many other things. But the fact that we could have twice the overall production, that is not our problem. We can never suffer from the ability to produce twice as much overall. We can only have problems if we apply it in bad proportions, in proportions out of line with what the consumers want. And then we have relative over and equal underproduction.
You say we can only have problems if we what?
If we apply the increase in the ability to produce in poor proportions. If we have excesses in some lines, deficiencies in others. That's the nature of the problem. Okay. But we always do want the ability to produce more. That's the foundation of our increase in real income. But our increase in real income, you see, as we have more real income, we do not necessarily want to spend it in the precise way in which it originates. If we had a doubled ability to produce everything, that would be the foundation of a doubled real income. That we very definitely want. That we can't have too much of. You'll never have over income, say, oh, I have too much income. I don't know what to do. Okay. We certainly want the extra income, but if the doubled real income were to originate in a way that we could produce twice as much of everything, and initially started doing that, we would not want twice of everything. There are some things that we want less than twice of, other things that we want more than twice of. And so long as we were getting twice of everything, there'd be many things that were in a state of relative overproduction, but other things that were in a state of underproduction. And the process of adjustment would consist of withdrawing capital and labor from the relative overproduced areas into the underproduced areas. That would be the nature of the problem, not that we're able to produce more overall. Yet one other example to bring this out. Suppose now we had a doubling of the productivity of labor confined to one industry, not potato growing any longer, but let's say the automobile industry. I think the automobile industry is in a different situation fundamentally. I don't think we'll want to eat very many more potatoes than we're already eating, unless there are brand new uses for them. But I think with automobiles, if you allow for quality upgrades, improving the kind of car you drive, as well as having more, would we at one point or another potentially want to have twice the level of automobile consumption than we now have? I would think so, without any question. But suppose the only improvement that goes on is that the auto industry becomes twice as productive. And along with the auto industry, we'll include that part of the steel industry that supplies the auto industry, the tire industry, etc., the automobile industry broadly considered. Now, how big is the automobile industry as a percentage of the whole economy in the calculation of GDP? Does anyone know roughly? 4%. You say 4%? Anyone with a different estimate? And I think it's actually on the order of about a sixth. If I'm not mistaken, I think the automobile industry and what feeds into it and goes along with it represents roughly on the order of a sixth of the economy.
So that's not just American companies, that's Japanese, German.
Well, I guess you'd have to allow for that too. Okay. Now, suppose in 1/6 of the economy, the ability to produce doubles. Now, how much of a rise in real income would this make possible? Ultimately, if 1/6 of the economy becomes twice as productive. An increase in real income on the order of a sixth. An increase in real income on the order of 1/6. Well, now, if your income increased by 1/6 of its present value, do you think you would be likely to spend that entire increase just in buying more automobiles?
No.
I think definitely not. And if it were the case that we had this improvement concentrated in automobiles, and the auto industry was starting to turn out twice the cars, the auto industry would find itself in a state of severe relative overproduction. Because if our income goes up by 1/6, well, we'd like somewhat more automobiles, but what would most of us like to do with most of the additional real income? Buy a whole variety of things. We'd want to improve our housing, our clothing, our leisure activities. We wouldn't want to concentrate it all on automobiles. But now, what would be required when we would be willing to have twice the automobile consumption? Not a 1/6 increase in your income, but what sort of increase in your income would lead you to feel, yeah, now I can afford to spend, to have twice the automobile consumption?
Probably on the order of 50%.
Pardon me?
75%.
Maybe 75. Let's say double. If your real income could double, then it would not be unreasonable to have twice the automobile consumption. But what sorts of things would be required to bring about a general doubling of our real income? Would it be possible just on the strength of improvements in auto production? What else would we need if we're going to increase our real incomes by a factor of 2?
More efficiency.
We'd have more efficiencies throughout the economy. If food production became more efficient, if home building became more efficient, if practically everything became more efficient, that would double our real incomes. Then we could have double the consumption of automobiles. Now, if you look at it in this light, the problem of the automobile industry, when it doubles alone and there's no improvement elsewhere, the automobiles industry's problem is there is not yet a sufficient increase in the production of other things. See, it's not really a problem of overproduction. It's relative overproduction for automobiles, but what's creating automobiles being in relative overproduction is the fact that we haven't sufficiently increased our ability to produce other things as well. If we could do that, then we'd take a doubled output of automobiles. But we're not going to take double the automobiles when we only have an increase in income that corresponds to the improvements just in auto production. We need a much wider range of improvements to increase our real incomes much more, then we would be takers of double the automobile output. So from that point of view, the auto industry's problem is an insufficient expansion in the ability to produce other things.
Aren't we saying, though, that there are no other innovators in the other parts of the economy to drive that change? I mean, the automobile industry cannot influence, I don't know, the airplane industry, for
Right,
example.
okay.
So there has to be a desire of those other industries to say, you know what, we need to get smarter, quicker, faster, better.
Okay. And this will never occur all at the same time.
Right.
But presumably, you see, if you have an economy, the economy we've had for the last 225 years roughly, in almost every year, there's been some noticeable progress. But these conditions were not true before that time. They may not be true in the future. In order to have the kind of innovation we've had, there are certain requirements that have to be met. You have to have people motivated to make profits. They have to be free to make profits and to save and invest what the profits they've made, to be secure in their property. You need a society in which a substantial portion of the most intelligent, ambitious people will go into careers in science, become inventors, and also go into business. You have to have an environment of widespread or broadly based economic freedom. I need a reasonably high degree of rationality in the society. So they'll be interested in science, technology, and so on. Now, if those things are wiped out, then improvement will come to an end. If you have a society in which people who manage to adopt innovations, think of them anyway, are not allowed to put them into practice, or if they do, their profits are all taken away so they don't gain anything by doing it. If you have a society in which people no longer pursue science and technology in large numbers, then the whole thing stops. Mr. Rosendahl?
Well, I'm trying to figure out then what the core component of capitalism would be, and is it the legal system that we have in place to protect property?
The legal system to protect property rights is an essential part of the core. Yeah, I would say respect for private ownership, including ownership of the means of production. The basic irreducible components, I think, are a combination of freedom and rationality. Freedom including the freedom to acquire and keep your property. So if you have that combination of freedom and reason, then you've got science, technology, people thinking long range, saving, providing for the future, motivated by profit. Nothing can stop them from applying their innovations. Then you have a tremendous burst of continuing progress. But we're in danger of losing that.
How's that?
Through more and more restrictions on what you can do, stopping people from innovating, preventing innovations in key areas of the economy, above all mineral production.
This would also extend to trades too, like as far as trading in other country restrictions, that can also...
Well, in trade with other countries, probably our restrictions have diminished rather than increased, but they could increase at some point. Yes, Mr. Davis?
How do changes in products factor into this whole concept that we've been talking about this evening? For instance, not that long ago, an automobile that had full power windows and door locks and all the rest of it was considered a luxury, power everything. Today, you can't buy an automobile without power everything. Houses were a lot smaller than they were. And things like homes were much smaller than they were. 20 years ago, a home was much smaller, didn't have things like granite countertops and upgraded carpets and tiles and things of that nature. Computers 2 years ago, were much less than the same dollar bought today.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
how does that all factor in? We're not buying more, but you're getting more.
Oh, well, if you're getting more for your money, that's equivalent to more. Like if you are getting 200 gigabytes instead of 200 megabytes, that's a major increase in production. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the aspect that you want me to elaborate on. I think you were asking, how does this work, or?
Well, I just have it. My question was, how does it factor into the whole concept of additional quantity, additional volume?
The improvements in quality can be regarded as an increase in the quantity. More wealth, if it's more beneficial. You could say a Cadillac might be the equivalent of 2 Chevrolets or whatever.
What's more utility?
Yeah, it's improved utility. We want to improve the utility. Yes, Ms. Herrera?
Correct. You're correct to a certain point, because we were stating how houses used to be made smaller and now they're made bigger. the houses are made somewhat bigger, but the quality of the houses, and I'm talking from a builder point of view, the quality isn't as good as the older homes. And you're not getting a bigger house because you have a smaller lot. Where, you know, I live in a 8,000 square foot lot, 10,000 square foot lot in LA. Over here you get 5,000 and the whole house is there, and all you have is this little yard here. And the quality of the house, I mean, God forbid you slam the door, it makes a hole through the wall where, you know, the older homes, you have to like pound it because it's made out of cast or.
Yeah. Okay, these are good observations.
But, so, I mean, that, and for the car industry, yeah, I have to agree with you in that sense that you have to buy everything included in the car. Because now it's not an option, now this is how the car comes, and so, you know, that is the case, but when it comes to the house, the home building and the bigger houses, I can agree with you on that, but,
Is it because of,
you know, and I believe that, you know, the more the quality, the more they're producing, and I meant to talk about this earlier too, when you were talking about Ford.
Yeah.
You know, they were selling the cars for $300 versus the $10,000 because they were producing more cars. It was cheaper labor, but also the quality of the car wasn't as great. And I had a client who used to build cars, and it would take her like 2 years to build a car, and she would have it by parts, you know, Bentleys, and it would take her forever to build this quality car, and she would sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But wealthy people, like back then, that, you know, could afford it, but now, you know, there's assembly line, you don't get the quality. That's my sense, you know, my observation.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Winchell.
With regards to the home building thing,
Yeah.
I mean, the improvements in construction and the way things are built today are so far beyond where they were 20 years ago. I've been in the building industry for 30 years, and I work on that stuff, and the houses are much better quality today than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, pick a time. So, I mean, improvements in the quality of materials and the way that they're produced and the productivity of the people who are building the homes, you get much more for your money today than you did.
Okay, you guys have a different view on this. Mr. Foster?
Well, on the same topic, doesn't demand have to come into place somewhere? Because right now, if you look, I read in the Register, I think last week, in the city of Santa Ana, you know, they have not enough homes for everybody. There's people who rent out a space on a person's living room floor for $250 a week.
Yeah.
You know, and that's equivalent of $1,000 a month, which, you know, you could rent your own apartment, but there's no room. So just because the demand goes up, you know, I'm not going to make an argument towards quality, you know, now versus then, but just the demand within itself is far greater. So therefore, you can sell lower quality, if that's your argument, for a greater price, because there's more people competing for it.
Sometimes that happens, certainly. Let me try to address these issues. It began with Mr. Davis pointing out how automobiles had improved and countertops and so forth in houses. I think the basic fundamental principle of a free market, the relevant one, is that there's a tendency toward continual improvement in everything. That we should expect in a free economy that the products will become progressively better, there'll be new, previously unheard of products appearing, and that everything will tend over time to become produced ever more efficiently at a lower real cost. Now, why should this be the case? Well, the basic principle is that if you want to make any kind of exceptional profit, if you really want to build a fortune, the basic way of doing it is you have to introduce improved products and/or more efficient methods of producing existing products. That's the key to making a premium rate of profit. You might also make a premium profit by successfully anticipating changes in consumer demand. Like after World War II, those department stores that realized that people would be moving to the suburbs, and they concentrated their efforts there. Well, they were on the spot in the face of strong demand. They did much better than the people who stayed in downtown areas of the cities. But the most important way is better products, more efficient methods. And for a time, you make an exceptional profit that way, But what happens as soon as competitors get wind of your profits, and especially if the competitors are suffering losses or lower profits because you're taking market share away from them? Just think, early in the 20th century, the automobiles all had hand crank starters. You know, you could see movies of someone stands in the rain, he's got to crank the damn car.
Ride in the rain.
Okay, pardon me?
And they ride in the rain.
And they ride in the rain. Okay, now at some point, someone developed a self-starter. Now, think of the competitive position of an auto company that can advertise, our cars now have self-starters. What's going to be the effect of that on their market share and profitability if they're the only ones providing self-starters, or there's just a handful of people doing it? They'll be very, very profitable, right? Now, what's the effect on the profits of the auto firms that don't have the self-starter? They go down. So what are they going to do as soon as they possibly can?
Find something else.
I have something, try to have a self-starter. Now, when everybody is selling cars with a self-starter, can anyone make any premium profit because their cars have a self-starter?
No.
Could you imagine an automobile company advertising, our cars have self-starters? They'd be laughed out. Okay. All right. Now, so what happens is there's a high profit made from the innovation, but then competition wipes out that high profit. And who ends up with the benefit of the innovation? The consumers. The consumers are now getting cars with self-starters. And then the same thing goes to automatic transmission, to power windows, power locks, DVD players, whatever. Now, you might have a special profit if you have a rear view video camera. Now, that's not going to last too long. Probably all cars will have that. Then maybe a special profit will be if you have a computer radar-controlled braking system. Then everything will have that. Everyone will have that. So the implication is there's ever more and better products produced more efficiently. That's what we should expect. That should be the basic outcome. And that would apply across the board, I think, if we had economic freedom. But we have serious abridgments of economic freedom that stop the process or even produce opposite results sometimes. And I think that may be the case, at least in some areas of housing. For many, many years, we had, we're back to deficits. What's happened to our savings rate? Savings rate is way, way down. Savings are the source of mortgage loans, of home building, and so on. If you have a lower savings rate, that undercuts the funds available for all kinds of capital investment. A major reason why people save less is the prospects for inflation. They think that if they do save, they don't know how much benefit they'll have from it because the buying power of money will be a lot lower. When there's less saving, less goes into things. To the extent that there's saving and investment, that shows up in more of current output going into future production. A larger share of the output of the present is devoted to producing output for the future. And I think this might even take the form of some of the newer housing having thinner walls. There's less going into the new housing in some cases, and I think this would be attributable to lesser availability of capital, but we'd have more capital if we had a more favorable tax system. If people were more future-oriented, we'd have the additional capital. Now then there can be further problems. And Mr. Foster cited the case of people sleeping in other people's living rooms in Santa Ana and so on. Well, think of what would produce such conditions. I remember not so many years ago, there was a story in the Register. I think someone in Santa Ana was renting out his garage for other people to live in. Now, can you do that legally? No. All right. Now, and what other things may happen that interfere with the supply of housing? Ms. Herrera referred to land sites available per housing unit and so on. Can anyone think of restrictions that we have that artificially limit the supply of land available? Zoning, the Coastal Commission.
Kangaroo rat.
Pardon me?
Kangaroo rat. Environmental.
Okay, an endangered species. Now, in Orange County, I believe that the county master plan only projects that about half of the land as a maximum will ever be built upon in Orange County. Now, also, there are restrictions on the height of buildings. There are restrictions on how many occupants there can be. So what is the effect of this on the costs of housing? It's making it higher to the extent that, I don't know to what extent in Orange County or surrounding areas you're required to employ union labor, but to the extent that you do, what's the effect on the cost of construction? That's higher. What's the effect of so many of the safety regulations? I mean, I understand that some safety regulations may be indispensable, but do you think it would be possible if we wanted to make an effort to cut the regulatory burden on housing construction in half? Would that be possible and still retain the essential safeguards? Do you think that there'd be any possibility of improvement there? I would think so. I mean, suppose you had a combination of insurers, mortgage lenders, builders, and they were given the assignment, come in with recommendations to cut the regulatory cost of safety requirements and so on in half or some substantial percentage. I would think that's doable. Suppose you abolished or at least liberalized the zoning requirements, stopped the Coastal Commission from taking away so much land, and the other county planners. They could increase the supply of land. If you allowed building higher, what are you doing to available space? They'd be increasing it. So now, if we did this, there are a variety of ways that we could have a more abundant supply of housing. Free up the industries producing construction materials, the construction industry itself, abolish all requirements that they deal with union labor. This would improve construction methods and the production of the materials and so on. What would all of these things do to the cost of housing? They would sharply decrease it. And this would free up housing for everybody. And then there are some further regulations. Many local governments think that poor people need their special protection to give them better housing than they otherwise would have. So there are regulations that limit the number of occupants that there can be, that prohibit unrelated people from sharing the same quarters, that may require so much window space relative to the square footage of the rooms and so on. And all of these things are making costs greater. And to the extent that you have some areas that prohibit people from living in them who otherwise could, because they'd be living in a dwelling with unrelated people, or there'd be too many of them, supposedly, for the footage. Well, these people are still alive, right? They have to live somewhere. So where are they going to live? The more the restrictions you have, like if Santa Ana is saying, it's illegal for anyone to rent his garage to anyone else as a dwelling. It's illegal if you're in a certain zoned area to rent rooms, or for two unrelated people to share the same room or whatever. The more you have of these things, if the people are still there and they need some place to be, where are they going to end up?
Jail, because they break the law.
In jail or on the floor of the living room that Mr. Foster called our attention to. You see, or under the bridge. The more you tighten the regulations in an effort to improve things in your locality, you simply intensify the problems in other areas, wherever people can go. So the best solution would be to make things as liberal as possible, in the sense of as free as possible. Yes, Mr. Weatherford.
It was simply stated as you could afford your home without the government if it wasn't for your government.
If the home wasn't for your government.
No, you could afford your home without the
Oh, I see. But for what the government does. Okay. Yeah. Well, everybody could afford something. There's no reason why anybody should have to live in the street or on the floor of somewhere. When we were much, much poorer than we are now, when you had miserably poor immigrant families with a huge number of children, they still weren't living on the street. They were living indoors. Room was made, not to the standards we would like today, but the more you set a higher minimum level, the worse you impose conditions on people. Yes, Mr. Richards.
If you didn't have any restrictions, what you'd get is developers would build huge high-rises all along the way along the ocean, and you wouldn't get any, you'd lose all the ocean views. And so you have all these, it's kind of like a wall up there. So by having, I live in Laguna Beach, and it's pretty strict to build a house down there. You have to go through what's called design review. And that's what makes it such a beautiful place down there, because you can only go so high, and so all these houses all kind of nestled in the hillsides. If not, it would be awful. So you have to have a little bit of regulation.
You say it would be awful. Maybe so from some perspectives, but by the example you yourself give, at present in Laguna Beach, you have little one, maybe two-story houses, so the people there have a view. Now, if it were true that we'd have skyscrapers, I think that would be more people with a view.
Well, not really skyscrapers. I mean, what it would be is certain people would get views along the seafront, along the ocean, whereas now everyone gets a view, because the design review rules are that you can build a house so somebody there next to you, you can't block their view. So whenever anyone's working with an architect, you preserve your view, you can't block somebody else's view, so everyone kind of gets a...
Okay. Is that more people would have ocean views than currently do at all. As opposed to protecting the ocean views of the few, if these regulations were freed up, that this building, your example of these large complexes, more people would have the opportunity of an ocean view.
So what you'd have is, I guess, more people have an ocean view, but wouldn't it look awful to have a skyscraper as tall as whatever going all
I don't know.
on the ocean front?
That's a matter of opinion. You can get somebody who says, and I'll quote it, the most beautiful thing about a tree is what you can do with it after you cut it down.
I mean, it would depend. You know, there are beautiful areas with skyscrapers.
But you know what I'm saying is, if you couldn't see the ocean because you had one long skyscraper.
Well, whoever was in the skyscraper on the beachfront, they would see it, and then you'd have to be higher up on the hills to see it. But look, you know, in a market, this can be decided. Let's suppose you want to have a certain view. Now, the way things are at present, the law is interpreted that your view gives you a right to the use of the property of someone else, that his use is limited so that he can't interfere with your view. Well, in a market economy, we could secure that. Suppose the guy who has the property in front of you is allowed to build as much as he likes, but you really want your view and you want to preserve it. Would there be any way possible that you could do so?
You just have to go up higher.
No, keep your house at its present height and have your present view, but what would you have to do to secure that in a free market?
Buy them out.
Buy them out. If you buy the land in front of you, then you've got the view. But now, here's 500 people who want to live in apartments on that site, and they're collectively able to pay much more than you are for your view. Which should decide? You see, do you have a divine right to your view? That's the question. You could have it if you can afford to pay enough to outbid the larger number of people who are looking to have apartments that block your view. So I would say in a market, it's which is the more profitable use. So you have some people, they want their continued view, and they pass laws to stop other people from offering a higher price for the land.
If you look at it, you say, okay, would you rather live somewhere like Laguna Beach or somewhere like Miami Beach where you've got all the skyscrapers? So
okay,
it's a matter of choice, really, I guess.
Yes, and some people are being prohibited from expressing their choice through constructing the buildings and getting the tenants. Okay, I'm sure this must rub some people the wrong way, but after all. All right. Again, we reached the end and don't quite cover everything. Maybe we'll have some more to say next week, finishing up this subject, or we'll be into fresh material. So have a good week, all of you. See you next week.